have always had an innate fear of the night. Not so much the dark, but the night itself. As a child, my imagination was overcome with stories of creatures that come alive at night, and the safety offered by a house and a light. I never had anything to base this fear on, until a night when I decided to go with a buddy of mine to a baseball game, and got stuck at a light at 2 a.m. after dropping him off at home. Of course, that night, the game went into extra innings, and so I didn't get a chance to drop my friend off back home until well after 1 a.m. Everything was fine on the way home, until I hit a light right before the street that led to my house. It was a T-junction, and I was turning left. The light is one of those that you think is broken until it finally turns green, right when you decide to just run it. Of course, I pulled up right as the light turned red. I would have just run the light, seeing as no one was there and it was closing in on 2 a.m. on a school night. But earlier that week I had heard the phrase, "Character is what you do when no one is looking." And for whatever reason, that was the night I decided to prove to myself that I was a man of character. Big mistake. I pulled to a stop at the light, feeling good about myself, bordering on self-righteous, when I happened to look out my window to my left and noticed a lady sitting all alone on a bus bench. We made brief eye contact, and I quickly looked away. It was too late. I could see movement out of my peripheral vision and knew she was coming my way. I looked out the window and noticed she was carrying a bag. I quickly checked that my doors were locked and all my windows were up. I then moved my right foot above the accelerator just in case, and braced myself for what was to come. I was hoping it would just be an awkward exchange and was praying for a quick light change before she reached me, so I could just get out of there. I knew there was a slim chance of that. She walked right up to my window, put down her bag, and began to tap on my window. I nervously looked up at her, and she mentioned for me to put my window down. I had automatic windows, so I just imagined pushing too hard on the window button, and that thing just coming all the way down. So I took a deep breath and lightly flicked it with my finger. The window moved microscopically down, but she did not seem to notice or care. She then leaned in and began to talk. She said, "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" I should stop and give a brief physical description of the bag lady. She was small and skinny and of indeterminate age. She was either in her mid-20s and had lived a hard 20-plus years on the street, or she was a 60-something-year-old who had lived a moderately hard life on the street. All that to say, just by looking at her, there was no way to verify her story. She looked beat up by life, not just by a boyfriend. But there was something about her delivery. It was robotic and seemed practiced, and like she was disconnected from the moment. That made my skin crawl, and after a brief, about a second debate on whether I should do it, I told her I had to get home and could not give her a ride. After my first refusal, she leaned in closer and said the same thing again. "My boyfriend beat me up. I have a friend who lives down the street. Can you give me a ride?" This time, I felt more confident when I declined to give her a ride and told her I had a curfew and had to get home. She leaned in a third time and began her statement again. "My boyfriend beat me." At this point, the light changed. I slowly lifted my foot off the brake and started slowly rolling forward and began muttering an apology. She didn't move. She just looked at the light, then looked down at me, leaned in closer, and said 5 words that have haunted me ever since. "You made the right decision." Then she picked up her bag and walked back towards the bench. I peeled out of the intersection and cried and screamed all the way home. I have no idea what she planned to do, or if people were waiting to jump in my car from the bushes had I moved to let her in. But that encounter has haunted me ever since, and has confirmed in my mind that nothing good happens after dark. So I'm new to Reddit and just discovered this sub, which is great because it means I can finally share this story. I know it's probably said a lot, and as always, there's really no way to verify it. But what I'm about to tell you is 100% true. I'm not talented enough to make this up. Around 2 years ago, I finally moved into a brand new house in a brand new building estate in Australia. I was one of the first to have a finished build in the area and was elated to finally gain independence. The first few weeks went by as normal, and during that time, I'd often take walks alone with the dog in the afternoons and roam the surrounding estate area. All the roads around us had been partially completed, and all the other properties were marked out, but no other houses were built, excluding the one that was directly opposite mine. The house looked finished, but there was no driveway laid yet, and from what I could gather, no one lived there. To the left of my house, roughly 100 meters away, was a field with a huge hill in it. I later found out that the whole area was council property. Not only was no one allowed to build up there, but the whole hill was basically a no-go zone. For whatever reason, the council just didn't want people on it, so the whole area was surrounded by a huge chain-link fence. The only other noticeable feature in the area was a small abandoned farmhouse with a shed a few kilometers down the road. I knew nothing about it, and often when walking there with the dog, as it gave me something mild to explore amongst the vast nothingness I was living around. The entire place was dilapidated and completely inhabitable, but it was still interesting nonetheless. About a month or two after moving in, I awoke one morning to the sound of a violin. It sounded extremely distant and quite haunting. I actually enjoyed it and assumed that the neighbors opposite of me had finally moved in. Excited that I finally had some people to talk to, I peeked out the curtain and saw the house opposite mine was still vacant, as it ever was. I got dressed, but by the time I managed to look outside, the violin had stopped. This happened roughly every second day for the next week. The violin would wake me up and then just disappear after about 45 seconds. I'd ignored it, to the point where my curiosity simply got the better of me. And the next morning when I heard the violin playing, I immediately jumped out of bed, threw on my dressing gown, and shot out the front door. I scoured the early morning surroundings. And there, up on the hill, was a figure playing a violin. It was barely light, but the person looked very tall from the distance I was at, and as they were playing, they were doing what could only be described as a waltz-type walk, spinning slowly around in a circle as they played. I took my eyes off the person and walked over to pick up the morning paper, and in the 10 seconds that took me, I heard the violin stop. When I looked up, I noticed the figure was no longer playing or dancing, but was now standing still and most likely looking in my direction. It was so dark I couldn't make it out, and we both just stood there for half a minute, not moving, before the creeps got the better of me and I went back inside. After that morning, things started happening. On my walks, I began to notice footprints on the surrounding properties that weren't made by me and that I'd never seen before, which I just assumed were from people walking up from the other housing areas down the road. I never awoke to the violin, but I swore I could hear someone walking on the street next to my bedroom window in the early mornings. However, I never saw anything. Other really general things as well, like random tools such as spades and rakes laying around the area, which I guessed were left by construction crews, none of which I ever saw. I'd started getting calls at work that would immediately hang up on me, and I also stopped walking up to the abandoned farmhouse, as the experience with the violin player had me a little shaken. One night, as I was heading to bed, I turned off the television in the living room, and again could hear the faint sound of a violin playing. However, it sounded more muffled, and rehearsed. I froze, and a cold chill flowed through me instantaneously. Considering that it was about midnight, and not the usual time I'd hear it playing, I went to the front window and peeked out to see that there was a light in the house opposite mine. It was clearly a candle, as I could see the dim flicker in the empty window, and the music sounded like it was coming from an old record player. But in the 10 minutes I watched, I never saw any movement inside the house. I moved away from the window, sufficiently freaked out, and after another 5 minutes, I heard the music abruptly stop. I peeked out again and noticed the light was now out. I never saw anyone. I began to become unsettled in the house, and would often invite friends over to hang out until late. But of course, nothing would ever happen when someone else was with me. I never bothered to tell any of my friends, as without evidence, I figured they'd just give me shit about it, and I'd just become more agitated. But nothing compares to what happened next. In my living area, the desk sits right next to a small window, which looks out to the fence surrounding my property. The steel fence is literally an arm's length from the house, and about 6 feet tall, so I always figured that, unlike most of the other windows, I'd never need to cover this one with a sheet or blanket, because no one could ever see in. I usually had headphones on when I played, and I always had the lights off, for no other reason than I preferred to play games in the dark. One night, when I was gaming, I got up and walked into the dark kitchen and got a beer out of the fridge. It was dead silent, excluding the faint sound coming out my headphones. As I closed the fridge and turned around to face the desk, I saw directly out the window 2 very, very faint lights. I didn't even catch on, and immediately started walking back to the desk, fixated on the small glowing balls. And it wasn't until I had my nose pressed against the glass that I realized the 2 lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes, a set of eyes, sitting just above the fence line, staring wide open at me. They didn't blink. They didn't move. My entire body locked up. All I could do was simply stare back, as my brain was still comprehending that there was an actual person looking at me in the scariest way I could possibly ever imagine. I don't know what happened either. My head kicked into gear, or my muscles loosened, but my body automatically collapsed, and I fell to the floor, scurrying to hide against the wall, away from the window. I could hear my heart beating through the carpet like a drum as I tried to lay as flat as possible. And as my mind was still processing the sheer severity of the situation, a violin started playing. That fucking violin and the haunting tune it always emitted started up, except this time, it was directly outside my window, and much louder than I'd ever heard it before. The lights were still off, and I wanted to get up to turn off the PC screen so I couldn't be seen, but my whole body just wasn't ready to cooperate. Not only was the sound of the instrument extraordinarily loud, but it sounded like it had been played with frustration, notes being frequently missed, and the strings screeching. The pace of it was getting faster, and by the time my dog Jeb out in the backyard had picked up on the situation and registering an unfamiliar sound, gave one solitary, deep bark. The violin instantly stopped, and the house was finally dead silent, excluding my headphones, which I could hear quietly working away. I was frozen to the carpet, and it wasn't until Jeb gave a second menacing bark that I heard the figure outside the window start to walk away in the direction of my yard. Once that first footstep hit the ground, I instantly thought of the welfare of my best mate, and finally, my head connected with my extremities, and my entire body kicked into overdrive. I leapt from the ground and slid across the laminated floor to the back door where Jeb was standing, staring into the backyard. I ducked to keep low and quietly unlocked and slid open the door. Usually doing so would notify Jeb that he was allowed inside, but when the door opened up, he didn't move an inch and was completely fixated on the pitch-black backyard. Everything told me not to go outside, but there was no chance I was letting anything happen to my dog. So I moved out onto the alfresco, moved behind Jeb, put my hand under his collar, and attempted to back him towards the house. Jeb is a pure Labrador and weighs like a sack of sand, so when he doesn't want to move, it takes sheer force to pull him in the direction you want him to go, and right now, Jeb wasn't going anywhere. I yanked at his scruff, and as I did, he emitted a bark like I'd never heard before. A deep, bellowing, "fuck you right off" sound that elevated my nerves to an all-time high. We both just stood there, waiting for some form of reply, and I couldn't remember how long we both just froze there. But eventually, I heard footsteps from around the side of the house begin to walk away, but not simply walk. Almost like whoever was doing it was slowly dancing in a circle. The footsteps kept to a beat as they drifted away from the house into the distance. Once I couldn't hear anything, Jeb licked his lips, gave me a look, and wandered back inside. I followed, locked the door behind me, and spent the night reverting to my childlike self, hiding under my bed covers with my dog. I didn't sleep a wink. That was the last time I ever saw or heard the violin player. The following morning, when the sun finally came up, I called into work sick and called the police. They scoured the lot next to mine and found footprints in the dirt. However, there were so many there that it was impossible to tell whose were whose. The only description I could give to the officer was his height. He would have been over 6 feet to stare over the fence at me, but they explained that he could have been standing on something, or on his toes. They also told me that they'd never received a report of anyone playing the violin in the area, or anyone been in the fenced-off hill either. I essentially looked like an insane person, but the officers were very nice about the whole thing and offered to patrol the area for the next few nights, which helped put my mind at ease. Nothing else has happened since then. Over the next year or two, people finally started moving in, and I tell them all the story about the figure I saw, some of which still used to keep their children in line, which I found funny. One guy nicknamed the council lot Violin Hill, and the name has stuck around our street since then. I even spent a period of time scoring the depths of the internet for that violin tune I kept hearing, but could never find it. There were a few classical pieces that seemed reminiscent, but I've since thought that whatever tune was played must have been self-composed, which creeps me out even more. I'm still in the house, I still tell people the story, and I haven't changed my routine one bit, which has really helped me to block out the fear of the experience. I game with the blinds closed now. Edit. I've been thinking more and more about the whole ordeal lately after writing this story, and decided to go charge up my old phone that was in the bottom of a box in my back room to see if there were any pictures from the past that I'd taken. Sure enough, I found this. A picture of Violin Hill from when I first moved in. This was even before the rest of the connecting roads existed, and there was just country surrounding me, and apparently broken toilets people used to dump shit up in this area because it was just so empty. From my very vague memory, the figure I saw was standing almost above that red and white post in between the trees on the top of the hill. Like I said, they were very far away, and the sun was only just coming up. The fence was also quite dilapidated and temporary when I moved in, but as more people started to arrive and the roads were laid down, the council put up a proper perimeter to block off the hill. Is it to protect the land they own? Or something more? Hope this gave you guys a clearer image in your head. About a year ago, in my final semester in college, I worked at a department store in the mall. I didn't have a car yet, so I asked for day shifts because it was a 2-hour bus ride back home. So basically, if I had a closing shift, I'd get done at 11, but not get home until 1 a.m. Sometimes I'd be given closing shifts, much to my annoyance, since I had a 6:45 a.m. class, and my mother worries, because who wants their kid on public transportation that late? Sometimes she could come and get me, but it'd be too much of a hassle to get my younger sisters out that late and such, so I never asked her. My managers, being the jerks that they are, gave me a week of closing shifts, knowing my situation. I was pissed, but whatever. One night, I had just finished my shift, got on the bus, I sat in the back, and was minding my business when my iPod died. I was annoyed, but I kept my earbuds in and occupied myself by playing a crossword on my phone. About 2 seats behind me, I hear these guys speaking Spanish. Now, my stepmother is Puerto Rican, so while I understand a fair bit of Spanish, I don't speak it. So I hear them talking, but I don't pay attention because it's rude to eavesdrop and all, until they say, "That black girl up there." Then my ears perk up. I keep my earbuds in so they think that I can't hear them, and I continue listening. What they're saying is horrific. To paraphrase, they knew my stop, second to last before the bus gets back to the terminal, and while my stop is at the front of my neighborhood, it's got no street lights, and at this time of night, it's empty. And to put it simply, they were planning on snatching that piece of ass up. I was about 20 minutes away from home, so I knew I had to act quickly. Since I knew they could see me, they were 2 seats behind me, like across, if that makes sense. I pretended to play on my phone, oblivious, while I was actually texting my mom. "Mom, can you please meet me at the bus stop?" 5 minutes go by. No answer. We're getting closer to my stop, so I decide to call her cell. No answer. I call the house phone, and she finally answers. It's about 12:30 a.m., so she was asleep. I try to talk as cheerily and calmly as I can. This was our combo. "Hey, Mom, did you get my text?" No. What's up?" "Oh, I sent you a picture of these jeans I'm gonna order online when I get home. I really need your opinion, so I really need you to look since the sale ends at 1 a.m. She gets the hint that I need her to look at her cell, so I say goodbye and hope for the best. We get to my stop, and I see my mom's car. I snatch my shit up and hightail it off the bus. I don't even look behind me to see if they're following me. I jump in the car and tell my mom to just go. I look in the rear view, and I see the guys staring at the car. The next morning, I called my job and told them I quit. No more public transportation for me. Thanks to my stepmom for teaching me Spanish. Thanks to my mom for getting the hint. Weird Spanish-speaking guys? Let's not meet again. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It is about 166 miles long and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forests from Roanoke County to Parisburg and Giles County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October, and the changing leaves and colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect weather, with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just like your typical hike, but our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you are supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night. We decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spot off the trail. A little searching around, and we found a spot a little ways off the trail in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I was awoken by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me, "Get your gun. Someone is outside walking around our tent." She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent, running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack, and then we sat silently listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard it. Snap, crunch, snap. Someone or something walking in the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had went out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated by only the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away, so as to not give away that I was out of the tent and have it become a shining beacon of my location. Instead, I waited to hear more noises. After a few minutes, snap, crunch, crack. It sounded like it was bipedal based on the way the steps were paced. I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounds like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way. And then from the original spot hear who or whatever was there take off into the woods. There's no way I am giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I tell my girlfriend about what happened, and I end up sitting guard outside the tent in the darkness until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around for a bit for signs of who or whatever it was, and I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't my girl's. This freaked me out, as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself, because I didn't want to freak my girl out any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep in, and still had 2 days left. That day, we walked a little faster than normal, and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang, and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point, I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this, as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911, and I kept the judge right next to me, and I assured her that if I slept at all, it would be with one eye open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep, and I stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours, just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess my exhaustion caught up with me, and I drifted off. I awoke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them, something along the lines of, "We are armed. Get the fuck out of here." They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn, ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was strewn all about. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction whoever was out there had fled. There was a creek nearby, and I walked to the edge, where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could, and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items, and headed back onto the trail in the middle of the night. I kept hearing people off in the woods, and hearing branches snap for quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was coming up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long ways from anywhere, and quite literally on our own, since we hadn't seen any other hiker the entire time we had been out there. I really felt we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded the corner, I turned around and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there, watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up and barely any light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us, and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone just messing with us. Maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I will never know, because I will not be returning to find out.